podcast where we put you on the map. This is Ron Costa broadcasting live in the Mappable USA studios in Las Vegas, Nevada. And our last show, folks, was on blockchain. Got so much interest. We're going to continue the topic. We're going to talk blockchain. We're going to talk about some platforms, etc. And before we do that, let's introduce Vicky Hutchmala from the WorldTokenMarket.com. Vicky, what's going on today?
Wow, Ron, we have an unusual event here in Vegas today. It actually is raining. It hasn't rained for a long time, and we just don't know how to handle it. But that's not going to affect this absolutely great podcast that we have with an excellent guest who's going to talk about everything anybody wants to know about blockchain. So I can't wait. Let's get going.
Exactly. And you know what they say in Vegas when they say make it rain, and that means good things are happening. So let's introduce Dan Truque. Dan is the manager of alternative assets over at Symbiont. Dan, how you doing today?
Hi, Ron. How are you? Hi, Vicky. Thanks for having me. Happy to talk about blockchain anytime. We can talk about this for hours. So in the 1 hour that we have.
Yes, exactly. I'll tell you, because blockchain is so new and so, quote, mysterious to a lot of people, then you're right. I mean, people can listen to this forever, get educated. That's what we aim to do. So before we get started with this, Dan, why don't we talk about you a little bit? Can you give us a little bit of a background on yourself and, how you got into this whole blockchain industry?
Sure. So I'll give you kind of like let's start with a long story, but make it short. But my wife
it sounds like a plan.
I should always say long story long. So let me do my best. I'm originally from Costa Rica, but I came to the U.S. to study and then stuck around. My background is in electrical engineering. I did both undergrad at Louisiana State University and then a master's at MIT, both in electrical engineering. I then worked in management consulting with McKinsey. This happened to be during the financial crisis, and all the financial institutions that were our clients were blowing up. So I got sucked into the risk management practice, which was fascinating. It gave me a front row seat to look at the inside and the guts of all these financial institutions that were navigating troubled waters back then. That got me kind of like into the financial sphere. So I ended up then moving on to a bank. I went to work for HSBC because I wanted to have an exposure to Latin America, and they had a very good practice on Latin American M&A, mergers and acquisitions. From there, I moved to their leverage finance team, so the issuance of bonds for buyout transactions. And then eventually moved to a quantitative hedge fund which is known, the name is Bridgewater. They're known for Ray Dalio's principles, very interesting culture. I was fascinated while I was there. I left then to work at a startup that I helped create while I was in banking, actually, called Market Realists, which was an equity research platform. That equity research platform still exists today. You go to marketrealists.com. It's free research. It aims to democratize access to high-quality equity research. After a couple of years of building that company and building the research team from pretty much myself to like a team of over 60 analysts, I eventually left and went back into quantitative finance, this time at AQR. AQR is another well-known, very large quantitative hedge fund. While I was at AQR, this was the time when you had all the ICO craze going on in late 2016, 2017, early 2017, and we started an internal informal group about blockchain. This was kind of like what initially got me into the blockchain side. I was already interested in that because I was contemplating the idea of a startup with a friend of mine to create a crowdsourced problem-solving engine. And we were looking at different ways of motivating people to work together. We were looking at the models, for example, behind Wikipedia, Reddit, Stack Exchange, and then suddenly blockchain came around and all these token models, and I was like, well, this is fantastic. You don't need to incentivize people with all these like very complex and fragile non-monetary incentives. You give them a token, that's money, and money talks, and then people are going to do what you want. It's fantastic. We looked into it. My partner in this, Jeremy Lee, he also works at Symbiont. He actually recruited me into Symbiont after when I left AQR. Jeremy was good friends with Mark Smith, the CEO of Symbiont. He introduced us actually to Joe Lubin from Consensus, one of the co-founders of Ethereum. And the interesting thing is that we went to Joe and we told this is the idea that we want, this is what we want to do. And Joe's reaction back then, which is what got me curious about Symbiont, was, yeah, this is a fantastic idea. We would love to talk about it. Perhaps we can incubate it within the Consensus ecosystem. But why are you coming to me if you have Mark? The technology Symbiont has is outstanding. And at that point, I was thinking, this is Joe Lubin from Ethereum saying that somehow this guy Mark has something that is amazing. Still, it took me like 3 more years to eventually go work at Symbiont, but I should have listened to Joe back then.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah, I feel like I'm in the right path now. So course correction.
Yeah.
Eventually, what happened then was that we decided not to go ahead with doing an ICO because I was coming from a financial background, so I was worried about getting a slap on the wrist by the SEC. The moment the SEC gives you a slap on the wrist, you are unhireable, and nobody else would want to hire you because every company always says there's a questioner when you work in finance. Says, have you ever been charged or convicted or something by the SEC? If you have a yes, even if it's with an excuse or something, they won't hire you. Like the compliance department doesn't want to bother with it. So I told my partner Jeremy, like, we shouldn't do this. It's not fully buttoned up from a regulatory standpoint, so we moved on. At AQR, along with another friend of mine, Anton Katz, who's actually now building a very successful blockchain trading platform called Talos, we built an internal group at AQR called, just focus on blockchain. And we're looking at blockchain in a very structured way, in a very systematic way to go in line with, our quantitative roots. So we're looking at blockchain from 3 perspectives. One, just the technology. So we're reading white papers and understanding the different protocols and the different layer 2 protocols that were coming out and just discussing them to understand the technology. Number 2, from legal and regulatory. So understanding how the regulation would fit within this, what were the taxation implications, etc. And then number 3, from a quantitative perspective. Are cryptocurrencies something that we can trade? Is there any alpha? So are there any essentially replicable abnormalities that we can exploit to make a profit? And that group actually became like super successful. And at some point we had, 50 people or more attending these meetings. So it was fantastic. Then at some point, Anton left, as I mentioned, to create this company called Talos. And that's when I felt that I was going to miss the train. And I was a little bit uneasy about it. Long story short, I ended up, and actually, as my wife say, I should say, long story long, I ended up also leaving to look at the different blockchain companies in the ecosystem. I spent 6 months essentially just going to every single conference, meetup, any event related to blockchain, met a lot of companies. And towards the end, I was getting a little disenchanted, thinking that it was a lot of smoke and mirrors and that nobody was building something solid. So I spoke with my buddy Jeremy, and he said, you should talk to Mark. By that time, actually, Jeremy had started working with Mark. He had joined Symbiont. So we got a meeting with Mark. I talked to him. We saw eye to eye. It was fantastic. He was just getting ready to close a round of financing that was led by NASDAQ and Citibank Ventures. And I guess I came knocking at the right time, and they hired me to manage the relationship with NASDAQ. And that's what started my journey with Symbiont. So now, it feels like an eternity, especially in blockchain years, but I've been now doing this for about 5 years of being like fully immersed in blockchain. So it's been quite a ride. And even though it seems like a long time, I still feel jealous of the people that had been doing this since like 2010 or so. So if somebody listening out there, if you haven't jumped on the blockchain wagon, there's still time. There's a lot to learn. The technology is still growing. The market's growing. And it's very important to keep in mind the differentiation between the market, as in cryptocurrencies, and the underlying technology. And that's something we can get more into when we talk about the different architectures and the technology itself. So that's a long story about my background.
Well, blockchain, even though it's relatively new, has gained a lot of attention in the last, well, especially because people are kind of stuck at home and exploring new things, and more people have become aware of it. And now it's an exciting time to get into blockchain because of more awareness and the technology is advanced. And I would think this is just an exciting time to make blockchain better.
Completely agree. There are a lot of opportunities. I think the outside of just thinking about the prices of cryptocurrencies, the technology itself, the underlying consensus and sharing of data in a decentralized paradigm is something that has a lot of applications that people should be excited about. And hopefully, if everybody does their job well, 10 years from now, nobody's going to be talking about blockchain. It's just going to be normal. Everything's going to be running on blockchain,
Yeah.
and nobody's going to talk about the underlying technology.
Right, like the Internet.
Exactly. Like right now, nobody's talking about, oh, this HTTP protocol, it's amazing. No.
That's right.
It's there. Like.
Yeah. No, I definitely see that.
Well,
I definitely see that happening.
Comfortable.
Yeah. Dan, before the podcast started, we talked a little bit about Symbiont and its classification. I guess you talked about it as a platform, but there are different types of platforms out there with blockchain. Can you explain the difference between maybe a permission-based a blockchain versus a public blockchain?
Yes, of course. So I think and this is something that I've given talks in the past explaining the different, what I call the blockchain taxonomy. In general, if you divide the world into two areas, there are the public blockchains and the permission blockchains. Some people call them private blockchains, but a private blockchain makes no sense because if it's all internal parties, you just use a centralized database. So really the correct term is permission blockchain. So a public blockchain is one in which you have multiple nodes that are coordinating to share information, but all these nodes are unknown, so they don't know each other. Because they don't know each other, you need to figure out a way of incentivizing them to run these nodes and, incur the expense and time and commitment to run the nodes. These are the public blockchains, and the way they incentivize the miners or block producers or bakers or whatever the term is for the relevant public blockchain. The way you incentivize them is essentially by creating tokens in the system that compensate them for the expense. So all public blockchains are always going to have some underlying token, which is a way of compensating those people managing running the blockchain. On a permission blockchain, you don't need that, because on a permission blockchain, you are there let's say in a consortium of companies. Let's say you have like 10 companies that come together. Each of them is running a node, and they are there for a specific reason. If a company raises their hand and say like, well, I want to get paid for running the node, then the other 9 companies can be like, well, like you're supposed to be here because you derive value from being in this ecosystem. If you just want to get paid for running the node, then we don't need you. Go away. Or it could be the case that you could have, let's say there are 10 companies, maybe there's one of them that indeed is providing some value of like helping maintain the nodes or something like that. So it's just gonna come across as a commercial agreement. They just get paid the normal way, not through a token system. So I hope that clarifies a bit the difference between public and permission, but the main thing is that a public blockchain has an underlying token. That is the cryptocurrency that we hear about. Well, a permission blockchain, it doesn't, because it's a bunch of nodes that are hosted by individual parties, and they know each other, and they are there for a specific reason, so they don't need to get compensated in an additional way.
Okay, so it's not a matter of security or as far as that goes. You're secure on both platforms. They're both immutable, right? They're both unchangeable. That has something to do with it, right?
There's a lot of nuances. There are a lot of nuances related to security and those other things, so we'd have to go more into detail. But high level, on public blockchains, you generally don't have any privacy. While in permission blockchains, you could, depending on the underlying platform, implement some type of privacy. To be clear, in public blockchains, you have what is called privacy coins, like Monero, Dash, or Zcoin, which they have privacy in terms of a simple transaction. I send you money and you don't know what is the balance of my wallet and you just received it and it's private. So that is very simple token transfer privacy. That is not what I'm referring to. I am talking about attachment privacy and more like channel type of privacy, where multiple parties can be on a channel and people outside of that channel cannot see it.
Okay.
For that, you need something more developed, which is what a permission blockchain can bring to the table. And not all permission blockchains can provide that. And I think that is one of the key differentiating factors that define which platforms actually make it in the enterprise world and which are just going to be destined to simple applications like token transfers.
Okay. One of the questions that we get a lot is the idea of this e-wallet or this blockchain wallet that you need to access your accounts and your information on the blockchain. Can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, how are they set up, and is that something that Symbiont does as well?
Yeah. So Symbiont actually follows that model slightly, and I'm going to explain it a bit. But let me first explain the concept of a wallet on a blockchain. A blockchain is essentially a ledger where you have a bunch of transactions, and every time a new block gets added to this chain of blocks, hence the word blockchain, new transactions are added. So within this book of transactions, you're going to have addresses. So let's say you have your address, your wallet address is wallet number, and it's like a 50-something digit long address. That is called the address where people can send you tokens. If we're talking about a simple public blockchain. Think of it like an email address. I can send you an email, and it arrives at your email address. So your email address is known. People know how to reach Ron. But they cannot read your inbox, because they don't have your password. So the address on the blockchain is how to send you tokens. The moment you receive them, they're yours, and people cannot take them out because they don't have your private key. The private key is essentially the password to access that wallet. That is the concept of a wallet on a public blockchain. On a blockchain like Symbiont, on a permission blockchain, we have the concept of identities. So when you're sending transactions on a Symbiont network, the messages are sent to those identities. I just want to, so essentially think of the identities as that same concept that you see of wallets in Bitcoin, for example. However, it is a very different architecture than one you see in other permission blockchains like Corda or Hyperledger Fabric. In those other permission blockchains, and in all permission blockchains in general, a user is a node. So if you want to have multiple users, you need multiple nodes. In public blockchains, you don't need that. If you want to have multiple users, you just create another wallet. And if I am sending you tokens to your wallet, I am not sending them to your node. I am sending them to your wallet address. The same way in Symbiont, if I am sending a transaction, I send it to the identity, not to the node. But in the other permission blockchains, in our competitors, you need to send the transactions to that node. And that is the key difference between our architecture and other permission blockchains. And that is huge and has a lot of implications in terms of privacy, scalability, data availability, and just overall ease and use of the system when you talk about enterprise use.
Okay. Well, then the question becomes, if you need this private key to access your e-wallet, I would imagine this private key is a gibberish of all kinds of crazy letters and numbers, et cetera. Where is that stored, or what if you forget that? What if you lose that?
On a public blockchain, if you lose it, you lose it. And actually, like recently on the news, there was the story of some guy that lost his private key, and he's got $240 million worth of Bitcoin leaked out. And there's nobody he can go say like, hey, please give me this back. That is one of the issues with public blockchains. And of course, that leads to a negative user experience, and then users are there turned off by that. Ironically, then what happens is that you have services that offer to custody your keys for you. So now essentially, if you lose your wallet, it doesn't matter, because then you just go to your wallet provider and say like, hey, I lost my key, like please get it back or something, or in some cases you don't even need to store your key, like they store it for you. And what they give you is a password to access their system. So it's more at the middleware level and not at the blockchain. The irony here is that the whole point of blockchain is that it's decentralized, and now you're trusting a third party to hold your password for you. So
right.
So you've gone back to square one.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but it's a way that I think improves user like user experience. One of the issues with public blockchains is that, like, if you really go maximalist in terms of decentralization, it goes against human nature. Humans tend, in general, to outsource transactions as the complexity increases. People are okay doing things themselves if it's easy, but once it gets a little complicated, they can trust other people. That's why people have bank accounts, and they are okay putting the money in the bank. They don't want to incur the expense and just the effort of stuffing the cash under their mattress and having to make sure that their house is safe because their life savings are stored under their bed. They're okay trusting the bank. In blockchain, it's not like that. If you're in a public blockchain, you have your wallet address, and if you lose it, you lost it. Unless you want to trust a third party that is going to store the keys for you.
Exactly. And I was thinking the ultimate irony would be to actually have a third party store your blockchain password in there when, like you said before, you need a password to get into that account. So if you were to forget your password for the password, that would be a double password forget.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be playing on the blockchain.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's why, for example, this whole craze lately about DeFi, decentralized finance, where people can go online and then they lend tokens to earn an interest on it. And then, you have these tokens that are paying like outrageously high interest rates on the tokens that you're lending. They're super attractive, but it's an issue in the sense that people have to custody their own keys. The user interface are going to be limited because in many cases these type of services would be regulated. And what they're doing right now is essentially a regulatory arbitrage by being able to go around the regulation by offering something that is decentralized so that the regulator doesn't have somebody to point a finger to be able to say, like, you shouldn't do that because you're supposed to be registered or something. And because of that lack of user interface, that lack of kind of like user experience, then it is very hard for these type of tools to gain widespread adoption. Nonetheless, I mean, I'm not taking anything away from the DeFi market. They have grown to billions of dollars under, under these DeFi schemes, and that is fantastic. And the system's the sector's still going to keep growing. I just don't see adoption by institutions. If you have a system in which, like, for example, there is no say on the governance, there is no say, like, if you lose your keys, that is where enterprise solutions come in. And the enterprise solutions are the ones that are the permission ones. For example, what happens if you are in a Symbiont network and you lose your key? Well, once you set up the network, there's going to be different permissions and different roles that are set up. So if you happen to lose your key, then because you're a real person in the real world and you know the people running the network, you can just go and say, like, hey, Citibank, I lost access to my key, and you issue me a new one. And Citibank is like, okay, yes. They go in the system, they invalidate your old key, and they give you a new one. And that's it. Or in the case that, let's say, a transaction is sent in error because somebody did I was going to send tokens to Vicky, and by mistake I sent them to Ron. You raise a dispute, and you say, like, hey, these tokens were sent to the wrong address, and then whoever is the person in charge of the system that can reverse the transaction can then go and issue a new transaction that invalidates, not that invalidates the transaction, but that reverses it. So let's say that I sent the funds by error to Ron. So then a new transaction is going to come in the system of Ron sending the funds back to me, and then we can do the right transaction of me sending the funds to Vicky. But all this works because we are all in the system, and we are held together by legal agreements and operational agreements, and there are real-world implications of not operating according to the way it should be.
Yeah, so it would be similar to like a credit card statement when you get a credit for a bad charge or something like that, right? It's on the ledger. It says plus 150, minus 150 type of thing, right?
Exactly, because the advantage of blockchain and smart contracts is the automation and the efficiency gains that you have from an operational perspective. And when you're on a permission blockchain, you also have that advantage of being able to intervene if something was wrong. And it's not the problem with public blockchains is that if something goes wrong, then okay, we're sorry, you lost your key, you lost your $240 million worth of Bitcoin. That's too bad. Imagine if that happened to an institution, to like a bank custodying the funds of some client, and somehow because of an operational issue, they lose access to the keys. That would be a disaster.
Yes.
And that's why permission blockchains are the way to go when it comes to enterprise solutions.
Well, let's go off in a different direction here. And if I'm a business, how would I approach the concept of using blockchain in my business? Is there certain industries that are more conducive to using blockchain, or do I start using blockchain to resolve a specific problem, like say inventory control or HR management or something, or do I just incorporate it into the entire management of my business? Mm-hmm. How does the business approach the concept of implementing blockchain?
I think that the first part of it is understanding what is the use case. So in general, you use the blockchain whenever you need to share data and logic. So not just data, but also logic, and by logic I mean workflows. So number one, you have data and logic to share. Number two, you may need to model complex instruments or workflows in terms of a business or in terms of financial transactions. Number two, so that's where the smart contracts come in. And number three, with a single source of truth. So what is that single source of truth? So if you're optimizing workflows within your company, the single source of truth can simply be your centralized database. So you don't need a blockchain. But if you're trying to synchronize data between different companies that because of their nature they cannot share the same underlying centralized database, that is when blockchain comes in. And because you're sharing data and logic, then the element of confidentiality comes in. So this is when you're starting to look at the privacy features of the blockchain that you're using. And I think this is one of the key parts, and one of the parts that a lot of people are going to blockchain kind of like postpone or think can be worked afterwards, but the privacy aspect of it is the most important one. So once you know that you're sharing data and logic, and that you need some type of automation, and that you need a single source of truth for all the different parties that are using this data or the system, that's when you can use blockchain. But then the main question that comes afterwards is the sharing of this data and logic. Does it need to be confidential? If it can be public, you might as well just run a public blockchain. That's easy, it's cheap, it's not going to be as fast, and you're subject to a lot of other issues related to public blockchains that I can get into in a bit, but it would get the job done. The problem is when you want to attach to it privacy, because the privacy is something that goes down to the architectural level, and it's very hard to shoehorn a privacy model into an architecture that is not built for it. And that is one of the advantages of the Symbiont platform, that right from the get-go, it was built with these things in mind. So actually, like maybe now it's kind of like a good time to explain where Symbiont came from. Back in 2012, and hopefully it's going to be one of these long story long, but short versions. Back in 2012, Mark Smith, our CEO and founder, he's been a successful entrepreneur in finance. He sold a company called Lava Trading to Citi back in the mid-2000s. It was a multi-FX dealer platform. Essentially back in the days where FX transactions were getting digitized, he created a platform that aggregated all of this, and it was a fantastic idea, and it got sold to Citibank for like over $300 million. Several ventures later, around 2011, 2012, he was looking to build something else. He was looking into blockchain, and he met Adam Perlstein. Adam Perlstein, our CTO, he was actually at the time the chief architect of Counterparty. Counterparty, back in 2012, along with, I believe, Mastercoin and just the concept of colored coins on Bitcoin, were the first ever protocols riding on top of Bitcoin to provide essentially a decentralized finance solution. And what I mean by this, essentially they were putting smart contracts on top of Bitcoin. Keep in mind, Bitcoin does not have smart contracts, and we're talking 2012. Ethereum came out in 2015. So 3 years before Ethereum came out, Adam was already putting smart contracts on Bitcoin. A year later, when he met Mark wanted to do something for financial institutions and something that would be regulatory compliant, and that's where they decided to create Symbiont. The Symbiont is essentially the symbiotic relationship between finance and technology. That's where the name comes from. And because they needed to build something for the financial institutions, they realized, okay, we need known entities, so it needs to be a permission blockchain. We need to have a privacy model that is scalable, that has the right confidentiality, the right functionality, and all these things inform the architecture from the ground up. And that's why our architecture is very different right from the get-go, and we were essentially one of the first ones. Like, Symbiont started getting developed before Ethereum even came to market. So we're talking about creating smart contracts and a permission blockchain before the leading public smart contract blockchain came about. So that's how deep our roots go in terms of the technology, and that's why we're so different from that perspective.
Yeah, you're talking about a global client base too, right? Not just the States, everywhere, right?
Correct. We actually have some clients in Latin America. One of our clients that I'm the most proud of, it's called GrainChain, and he's always going to get all other financial clients jealous because I keep talking about GrainChain because I just love it. A lot of the clients that we have, when we talk about clients and partners like Vanguard, NASDAQ, Bank of New York Mellon, State Street, we are helping them improve their operations. We're helping them make their process more efficient. We're helping them reduce settlement and counterparty risk. So essentially, we're helping make these financial institutions more robust and more efficient with their use of capital. And that in itself, it's amazing. But at the same time, while that is great, it's not the same warm, fuzzy feeling that you get when we talk about GrainChain and helping farmers in Latin America getting paid instantly upon delivery of the agricultural products by using a blockchain. That is just completely different. Of course, different type of impact, but it just feels more, it's more social impact, but at the same time super innovative. Because, for example, in the small farmers in general, when they sell their harvest, they get paid 2 to 3 weeks later. Using a blockchain, what GrainChain is doing is essentially connecting the producers with the buyers so that, A, you get rid of a bunch of intermediaries, so now the farmer is selling at a higher price, the buyer is buying at a lower price, the people that are losing are the intermediaries in the middle that you no longer need, and the farmer is now getting paid instantly upon delivery. So several things happen when you get paid instantly upon delivery. One, because you're notified of the transaction instantly. If there happen to be any disputes about the amount, the quality, or something, then you can raise it up instantly. Instead of a month later when it's like, well, it already happened, I don't know, I didn't get the full amount, and then it's too late to dispute it. Number two, the payment is done on-chain instantly, and the digital title of the commodity is exchanged right away. So that leads to a lot of things. It reduces the settlement risk because you only exchange the cash for the digital title whenever the commodity actually arrived. Number two, it allows for that instant payment not only to the farmer, but also to the banks providing financing to the farmer, which leads to number three, which is reduced expense in terms of credit lines. And also expanded access to credit because now all these farmers are more likely to get financing from banks because the banks know, one, they have visibility into the amount of inventory that the farmers are moving, and two, they get guaranteed instant payment every time a farmer sells a load on the system. So these are the type of blockchain applications that I think have an amazing amount of potential outside of finance.
Well, it makes for a more level playing field for everybody, as well as an increase in cash flow.
Completely. It opens it. It helps the banks, because even though now the farmers won't need the lines of credit to be drawn for longer, it actually opens new clients to them, because in many cases the banks wouldn't even lend to these farmers because they have no way of knowing that they're going to get paid. And GrainChain is taking this a step farther, and they're now developing a system in which the banks can actually provide money to the farmers, and that money can only be spent in specific retailers. So let's say they can only be used for buying fertilizers or tractors or materials, as opposed to just, here's some cash, please use it only for farms.
Yeah.
Yeah, so exactly.
So actually blockchain then kind of crosses all the different lines. So you can use blockchain to your advantage if you're a company. You can use it if you want to oversee or make things more efficient in a specific industry, or just, use it as an individual to buy and sell tokens. It just kind of crosses all the lines and is exponentially developing to encompass everything. It even can be used to run a government.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of smart city applications that people are working on that are super interesting. There's also, when we're talking about central banks, for example, the concept of central bank digital currencies is something that keeps popping up. There's a lot of research by the IMF and the Bank of International Settlements. We've had conversations with the Fed to discuss simply how this would, as a technology, work through an external consultant. We've had conversations with Bank of England, several other central banks. I'm not sure how many of these conversations are public, so I'm not going to mention other ones. But the use of blockchain to create a central bank digital currency at the wholesale level makes a lot of sense. And what I mean by wholesale level is that what you're doing is you're connecting all the banks together with the central bank to provide what would be effectively more efficient payment rails between the banks. So we're not talking about a central bank digital currency to provide access to every single person, because that actually opens a whole new can of worms, which is if any citizen can access the central bank directly, then now you're disintermediating the banks and affecting monetary policy. So we're not going there. Right now, one of the key applications is simply providing more efficient payment rails between the banks, so that in turn the banks can provide more efficient payment rails to their clients. So all this stuff of like, okay, we send a wire and you gotta wait 3 days for the wire to confirm or something like that, it would be a thing of the past. Essentially, you're still gonna go to your bank and get the wire transaction, but it's gonna reflect instantly in the blockchain. And because the banks are now all looking at the same ledger, they don't need to wait 3 days and their back offices, teams talking to each other to make sure that they all see the same numbers. They instantly look at the same ledger and it works.
Yeah. That's a great point. And another thing about this too, Dan, before we close this out, you're talking about these private permission-based blockchains, et cetera. Is the speed of the transactions are they getting faster? Because I think that was one of the concerns. People swiping credit cards or putting data on the blockchain. All those different transactions have to take up a little bit of time, and I think that for a while there it was kind of slow, right?
Well, it is kind of slow, and it's intrinsically slow because of the way the system works. However, for example, if you look at permission blockchains and the way their consensus works, it's literally 100 times faster than the consensus algorithms that you have in public blockchains. I'll give you like a really quick crash course on consensus for public versus permission blockchains. In public blockchains, let's look at Bitcoin as an example. A new block is created every 10 minutes. So essentially, when you publish a transaction to the blockchain, what happens is you have a race of computers that are just racing against each other, doing a brute force approach to figure out a mathematical problem. The first one that finds that problem raises their hand and says, like, I found a solution, and because I found a solution, I get to write the next block on the chain. And so that block producer that won gets, number one, a reward from the blockchain itself. So I think right now they get something like 12.5 Bitcoins as a reward, plus all the transaction fees that are from all the transactions that they put in that block. That's how the miners get rewarded. However, the difficulty of that mathematical problem that they're solving takes about 10 minutes. That's why a block on Bitcoin, it takes 3 minutes to confirm, because it's built that way. However, there could be the case that two computers solve the same block at the same time, very close to each other. So at any given time, you could have 2 or even 3 versions of the Bitcoin blockchain going on. So eventually, the longest chain is the one that's going to win. And that's why for Bitcoin transactions, ideally, if you want to be safe, if you want to be absolutely safe that no other chain is going to be longer than the one that confirmed your transaction, you need to wait 6 blocks. 6 blocks would be essentially 60 minutes, 1 hour. That's a disaster. What you're trying to do is like pay for a coffee. And in Ethereum, of course, it's
exactly.
much more than that. But that is the whole point of why there's the public blockchains are slow, because you have a lot of different computers trying to coordinate with each other with very inefficient consensus algorithms, which is the proof of work, which is this brute force approach, or the proof of stake, which is a different approach that I'm not going to go into for the sake of time, but it's still slow compared to the consensus algorithms that you have in permission blockchains. In permission blockchains, because all the computers know each other, you don't need to have a complicated consensus scheme that requires a lot of time. Instead, let's say it's like us 3 on a network, and we just need to confirm against each other. I just need to say, okay, like, these are the transactions I see. Ron, what do you see? Okay, this is what I see. Vicky, what do you see? This is what you see. Then you do the same. And essentially you have like 2 or 3 rounds of very quick consensus that comes back in a matter of like a few hundred milliseconds. So permission blockchains are very, very fast, and theoretically can have tens of thousands of messages per second. That essentially gets you very close to what you get in like a credit card network speed.
And plus, I would think it's vital for problem solving, because if you have instant information with instant transactions, you identify problems and you can instantly solve them instead of take 3 or 4 weeks to finally be able to resolve whatever the problem was. Take care of it as soon as the transaction is done.
Yeah, exactly. So in the case of supply chain, if you get the information right away, then you can address any disputes while the situation is still fresh. Same thing, even within financial transactions, you can address it right away and be able to settle a transaction within minutes instead of within days. It allows you also to perform the same operation more frequently. So one of the big projects that we're working at Symbiont is the automatic collateral settlement. So when you're looking at over-the-counter derivatives that are traded between banks, I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. But essentially, let's take, for example, an FX swap, where 2 parties are exchanging different currencies for a given amount of time as a way of hedging their currency exposure. So I give you euros, you give me dollars, and it's a contract for 3 months. And essentially, at the end of every day, we look at how the FX rate changed. And if now your side of the trade is underwater, you need to post money to me. And if it's the other way around, I post money to you. That way, at the end of every day, you don't owe me money and I don't owe you money. And at the end of 3 months, that's kind of like when the contract's over, or whenever the term is. That daily posting of collateral is something that happens between the custodian banks, and it goes overnight. There's the one bank talks to the other one. They need to agree on what the FX rate was. Based on that, they need to agree on what the value of the contract is, the market value of the contract, and then they need to move the collateral. Moving the collateral is not just moving the cash. They need to agree what type of collateral is acceptable and then do all these things. It's automated a little bit on the back office, but because of all these things that one bank needs to coordinate with the other one, and if something doesn't match, there needs to be some reconciliation process, it's only done once a day. So if I have $1 million position
and let's say that we assume that the daily volatility of that position is 10%. That means that me as a bank or a counterpart in this transaction, I need to have $100,000 to back that position in case at the end of the day the market moves plus 10% against me. Now, if instead of moving the collateral once a day, I can move it once every hour, because the volatility increases with the square root of time, and square root of 24 is close to 5, what that means is that instead of having to have $100,000 to back $1 million position, I only need 1/5 of that. So that means instead of $100,000, I only need $20,000. So now when you think about this, the risk capital requirements from the banks go down 80%. You're releasing 4/5 of the capital. We heard after the financial crisis all the issues that the banks were having in terms of maintaining adequate risk capital to back all the positions and all these things. Imagine if you walk into a bank and you tell them, I can offer you a solution that is blockchain-based that allows you to release 80% of your risk capital. Essentially, that means the bank can go and do...
Your phone would be ringing off the hook with that. There's no question. They would be all over you for that. That'd be great.
Yeah, exactly. They can use that capital to either do 5 times more business for that same type of transaction, or grab that 80% of free capital, lend it out for something else, or simply return it to investors if you don't need that amount of capital. Or safety cushion.
Dan, that one point alone just sold me on the whole permission-based blockchain thing. There's tremendous potential on something like that. Really incredible. Listen, Dan, if someone's listening to this podcast right now and they want to get more information on what you're doing or the company in general, what would they do? What's a good way to get a hold of you?
Well, to get a hold of me, it's pretty simple. You can just send me an email at daniel.truque@symbiont.io. Or even if you want to get time with me on my calendar, there's an app called Calendly, like CALENDLY. So if you go to calendly.com/Dan-Symbiont, you can see my calendar there and just set up some time to talk to you. I'm more than happy to talk to people. That's part of my role. It's essentially being the evangelizer of permission blockchain out there. I love talking about different architectures, explaining the differences between Symbiont and other permission blockchains, talk about public blockchains. Happy to chat anytime, so if anybody needs to reach me, that's the way. You could also contact me via Twitter. My handle is @Truque, TRUQUE. But if you forget about all of that, simply just go to Symbiont.io and just find the contact form at the bottom of the webpage, and that will eventually make itself, it'll find its way to my inbox.
Yeah, and Dan, we're gonna put all this stuff in the show notes too, so we're gonna link to all that so that people get a hold of you pretty easily. But before we go, Vicky, how come they don't teach this stuff at Harvard University or other Ivy League schools? How come you have to go to a podcast to listen to Dan to get an overview on what blockchain and permission-based blockchain is all about? Why is that?
I think it's called transparency.
Oh man, yeah. Dan, I can't tell you how impressed I am today with all this information that you gave out. I really appreciate you being on the show. And, man, oh, man, what an education you gave us all today. Great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
We're barely scratching the surface. And as I mentioned, more than happy to have more expanded conversations about this topic. It's fascinating. There's a lot of potential. And I'm super both proud and feeling, fortunate and blessed that I'm in this position where I can be at this bleeding edge of technology and helping to craft, the future applications of this. Thanks again for the time. Love the conversation. Anytime, I'm available.
Great. And thank you. And Vicky, thanks a lot for co-hosting the show. And folks, you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast on MappableUSA.com. If you go to that website and you scroll down, you'll see all our syndication sources. Pick the one you like best, subscribe, and you'll never miss another one of our episodes. If you'd like to be a guest on the show like Dan was today, there's a guest tab there. Just fill that out, and we'll see what we do about getting you on the show. And if you like what you heard today, send us an email at info@MappableUSA.com, or just comment on whatever page you're listening to this on right now. So thanks, everyone, for your support. Thanks for listening. We'll be at you next week with another Mappable USA podcast. Have a great week, everyone.